I'm learning what it means to dwell in mystery a little bit more. And I think that's not surprising because God is very big, and he's in the business of making us more like him. And in fact, if there's anyone who just holds all things, like that's him.
Welcome to the Crazy Love Podcast. In today's episode, Francis Chan concludes his conversation with his good friend Ryan Takasugi as they reflect together on the lessons learned from the Lord in a season of deep sadness and grief.
And I just want people free. I
Yeah.
want complete freedom myself.
Yeah.
I want everyone to see this good news of God's love is not like this approval that you've been seeking from so many people and probably from God himself.
Yeah. That's good. I love that you use the words good news because, obviously when we don't really throw it around, but we use the word gospel a lot.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people come in with baggage about just what is the gospel. And some people, like, that baggage is not necessarily bad baggage. It's just incomplete.
Yes.
Right? And so, I know how to explain the gospel to somebody else. So it's very intellectual. Right? Or, of course, there are people who have experienced the gospel being like shouted at them, and so it becomes this emotional thing. And so as that word has been laden with many different things and sort of like culturally sort of shifted into different places as well, that fundamental underlying reality that it is good news. And it is good news in every single circumstance for every single person. That is not how I think about it oftentimes. And therefore, I think about the words then, right? The word is the good news that was preached to you that Peter's talking about in 1 Peter. I'm expecting bad news for myself oftentimes as I go to the word or as I go into prayer. But the Lord is the one who not only wrote the good news, he is the one who continues to speak it most clearly. And he longs for us, he longs for me to come under this word that he wants to just keep planting, that it would dwell in me richly and keep springing up in my life this same good news of grace. And I think about how I handle his word in my life. And the reality is that oftentimes I treat it quite poorly. I know a lot of the things, and there have been many times when I have very clearly understood something here and chosen in rebellion to go a different direction. Or there are times when I've forgotten things. I just don't hold on to them. I don't treasure them the way that they deserve to be carried. But I keep taking this word, this very treasure that he's given us, and not just a treasure, but the thing that upholds the whole universe. He upholds the universe by the power of his word. He created it, and then he upholds it, and of course he entered into it as the word. And I take all these words, and I treat them poorly. I discard them, or I read the worst intent into them. But then even after I treat it badly, he still keeps speaking, right? His blood declares a better word. And then even now as our advocate, he's speaking on our behalf. All of his words, they just keep being for us. and on our behalf and good for us. And it is good news over and over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, when you first said that, and about it always being good news, the first thought was that day that we all came over to your house as the elders and the leaders.
Yeah.
And your 6-month-old daughter had just passed away. And I will never forget, first seeing you, hugging you, and everyone was there, and the elders, their wives, and the first thing I remember, she may have said something else, but the first thing I remember B saying out of her mouth was, "Someone tell us the good news. Someone tell us the good news. Just read from the scriptures. Tell us good news. We know the bad news.
Yeah.
We know it." And as the leaders started saying these verses, and then B starts quoting them. It's like they would, fumble in their Bible and say the first few words, and she would quote the rest of it.
She's good.
Yeah, she's amazing. But it was so powerful. Yeah. She just knew, this is what I need.
Yep.
I need the good news.
Yeah.
In the midst of the worst season, I'm guessing, of your lives. Most painful experience of your lives.
Yeah. There is a word that Jesus quotes from Moses: "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And I think we never really got that verse until we went through this season. And I don't think there's any way that my soul could have continued to be alive. I would have been just a shell, maybe visibly alive, but internally just completely decimated, if it weren't for the words coming from his mouth. That was my sustenance. And we're actually, we're lots of 1 Peter today.
Yeah.
We were talking yesterday about how, he quotes from, I think it's in Isaiah, "All flesh is like grass, all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers and the flower falls, but the word of the Lord remains forever." And there's this way in which, we were confronted in the most horrible way possible, that our flesh is like grass. And there's the contrast then of the word of the Lord. And, flesh is this thing that we can see and touch and feel now, but over time it fades. Fades into, this flesh, into nothingness until we get new flesh. And the contrast of the word being the opposite, something that we can't put our hands around, really. We start to get our souls or our minds or our hearts around it in little ways, but it doesn't feel solid or tangible. But then over time, the promise from the Lord is that he's going to fill up his words with reality and with glory. And these are the words that right now just seem like concepts or like distant ideas, vague things, are going to become clearer and truer and stronger and more solid and more weighty. as time goes. And I feel like we were transported to a place where we're like, oh, that's what I need to be anchoring in that word and in that future, far more than anchoring in this flesh, my own flesh, but even the flesh of those around me. Not actually to belittle this flesh, but actually to say that it's even more important than I thought. As vessels of his Spirit, it is both more important and less important at the same time. It's less important because the flesh will fade and everything that is eternal about us, including the words that he's given us, are the things that will last. But it's actually more important because he has chosen to use this flesh to bring my spirit close to your spirit. And so then grieving the loss of Zuri's body, I think almost went deeper, because now like I realized what I lost actually. It wasn't just flesh that I lost, but it was the way that it brought her spirit near to me. And so it almost like deepened the loss in the moment and accentuated or heightened the hope that I have for when I get to dwell with her in glory. And these things are only possible to trust or have hope in because his word is good news.
Wow. It's interesting. Okay, a year ago I did a wedding for a friend of mine, and then this Saturday I did his funeral. I've never done that, almost to the year. Younger guy and unexpected heart attack, and I was late because I was speaking at another event and I had to catch a plane. The plane was delayed. I'm late to this memorial service, and when I walk in, worship's going on, and the bride, is in the front row on her knees just worshiping God with this peace. And then shortly thereafter, as I got there, she's already up and dancing and singing to God with this glory on her face. And it reminded me of Zuri's memorial service, where you and B, I really felt were like worship leaders to the entire church, because we saw you somehow were holding on to the good news and genuinely enjoying it amidst real grieving. I told you guys this, like, I learned so much, and I thanked you guys for being an example of at least what I saw as the right way to grieve. Like, you didn't mask, like, this hurts so badly. And yet you're learning these glorious truths in the midst of it. I don't even have a question or a statement. I just feel like there are, like you said, man does not live by bread alone. Like, that's just a verse. Of course you believe it, but you didn't really get it until that time. And that's where I'm listening, going, gosh, I don't know if I really get that. What are some of the things where you go, here's probably one or two of the most deep, richest things I learned amidst my deepest grieving.
I don't know if I can distill it down to one or two.
Whatever. I mean, whatever comes to mind as the Spirit leads you.
I think first of all, I'm very much in the thick of it.
Yes.
And actually, yesterday was 11 months since we lost Zuri. And so I was just weeping last night. And it, I don't know when, maybe it's supposed to be like this for the rest of my life. I was talking to a friend. I think one day I will be, God willing, like an 85-year-old man who's missing his 6-month-old daughter. It'd be this like weird kind of thing, but that is in some sense the call to continue to just not almost like not be okay with this being the reality that we have to endure, and not being okay with the effects of sin. So yeah, I feel like so ill-equipped to talk about like full lessons learned. But that said, the Lord has sustained me, and by his presence and by his word. And there's this this anticipation and this sensitivity to heaven that has become so much deeper and truer of me. And that's good. And you know, to your point of like, there is this good news. Like I would say have begun to orient my life more and more around this good news. You know, we talked about this idea that in heaven we're going to receive love. Like that's one of our primary, if you will, vocations. Like I want to optimize for heaven much more than I want to optimize for earth, and that's good news, and that's because I'm trusting his word in deeper ways. I'm letting his word not just be something that I read and understand maybe to some degree, and maybe even like can memorize, but like I'm letting it infiltrate my flesh, like trying to become word made flesh even here. And I think I'm just at the starting point of that journey, but I don't think I'd be functional if I weren't allowing his word to infiltrate my flesh, and to lead me into all of these dark places. You know, early on, and honestly, even today, there are you know, thoughts or reflections that feel extremely dark. And actually for a while, like anytime I looked at a picture of Zuri, not just like glanced at it, but when I looked at it and I studied the details of it, I saw, you know, I would think about her fingers or think about her hair or think about her laugh. Like there would be this kind of like boom boom of like first just the elation of knowing her and of experiencing those things, and then my heart would jump to the end, or my mind would jump to the end and realize all that is gone. So it's like approaching this like beautiful bright star, and then the star like collapses, and then there's just a black hole, and that's all that's left. And I would feel myself tumbling into it, and I would like, you know, grab onto the edge. I know that they don't actually have edges, but you know, sort of like pry myself out, and I was just racked with this fear of that darkness, And so that felt like death. But then what I found myself doing was not looking at pictures of her, and not watching videos of her, and not spending time remembering her, because that death felt so unapproachable that then I was like, I'm just going to close that up. But in the process of closing that up, I was almost doing a worse kind of violence of like pushing her away. And that was even worse. It was like a worse kind of death in a sense. And so I was confronted with this reality of like death if I look at her, or death if I remember her, or death if I don't. And that kind of oftentimes feels like the choice that we have in life, like a death or death. So we were reading through Philippians, I think at the time, and in Philippians 2:12, it says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure." And, we know that this isn't like works righteousness, that we are earning our salvation, but there's some element where our salvation is being worked through all of ourselves. We're being saved to the uttermost, to every corner and nook and cranny of our existence, of our being. And I realized here now was this part of me that was dark and needed salvation. And I think I got those words with fear and trembling in a way that I hadn't before, because actually the places that are part of us that most need his salvation are the places, at least to some degree, where I feel most hesitant to go, where there is like a fear and a trembling to go into those places, because they're dark, and they're like full of death, and I don't want to look at it square in the face. And but it is God who works in me. And I was realizing that as I was holding death and death, they were both death because they both were dependent on my own strength. Either look and fall in the black hole or just close it up. That's also bad. But like, what does it mean that light has entered the world and darkness has not overcome it? And that one day, like, there will be no need for the sun because he himself will be our light. And like, all of a sudden, again, these things that are just words suddenly started to become food for me, to be like, oh no, I can go into these places that cause fear and trembling, these places that are extremely scary and dark, and I can go into them with an assurance from his word, and with a solidity and a strength from his word that like I'd never experienced before. And that, for lack of a better word, is good. Being able to experience going with him into those dark places is good. And that's something else that's been tricky about grieving, is that there are some of these things that have happened after she's died that have been good. Of course, some of the things that happened after she died that are good are like, we went on a trip. That was a good thing. We would have loved for her to have been there, of course. But there's another kind of good thing that has happened after she's died, which are the good things that could only have happened because she died. At least as far as I can do as I can pull it together. And those feel extremely, I don't know what the right word is. It feels, there's this tension or this like uneasiness about there being these good things that have resulted because of her death. And like things that I've experienced of the Lord, or ways that he has proven himself true, words that he has spoken that I have now learned how to believe more deeply. And then a bunch of other things. Like I've seen our kids yearn for heaven and yearn for heaven. And I've seen our church yearn for heaven. And even some, like you sharing that, like some of, like her memorial service would not have happened if she hadn't died. Like there have been some of these good things. And when I first think about it, my first instinct is, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Like I would give up all of these good things to have her back. Like, and that's my sort of natural fatherly instinct. And so there was a time when I was actually almost avoiding some of these good things. And maybe where I would not have even been able to tell you that they were good things in this conversation, because either I wouldn't have wanted to be aware of them, or I wouldn't have wanted to confess that they were good. But the Lord has gently come alongside me, and he said, Ryan, it's not your job to do the math. And I like math.
Just two Asians here talking about math.
About how much we like math.
Yes, I love it.
But I remember back in algebra, the goal in algebra is to simplify the equation.
Yes.
Right? 2x equals 6 is not the answer to a question. X equals 3 is the answer. And so I look at this equation of like this horrible, horrible thing, and these other good things, and I'm like, I'm trying to simplify the equation or net them off, and I'm like, it's not worth it. And I get to be the one who sits in the judgment seat doing the math, saying it's not worth it. And what I felt the Lord saying to me over time is like, your job is not to do the math. In fact, your job is just to hold both things. Hold the fact that this has been the worst thing that's happened in your life, and hold these good things as well. And both are true. And you don't need to net them off. And you don't need to, therefore, make a judgment about the situation or about God. Just hold them. And I've realized that as I've just held them, that I'm becoming bigger. Like my heart's becoming bigger. Like my soul is becoming bigger. And I'm learning what it means to dwell in mystery a little bit more. And I think that's not surprising, because God is very big. And he's in the business of making us more like him. And in fact, if there's anyone who just holds all things, like that's him, right? He's holding things, and he's not just like always like netting off and simplifying everything. He's comfortable with complexity and mystery and just holding it. And so I'm holding this tiny little bit as his way of making me a little bit more like him. And that's good.
Wow.
And also, it's still hard, because that's still not worth it. But the point is like, but that's not my call to make. That's not my call to make. And so I feel like the punchline, well, that's a terrible word to use. But one of the takeaways has been, and I shared this with you, actually back in February at Zuri's birthday. There was this call of the Moravians, right? This statement, may the Lamb who was slain receive the reward for his suffering. And that, as I've like, if you will, done the math, is the only thing in my life that like ultimately foots out at the bottom of the equation. I can, when this first happened, my mind goes to all of the why questions. Why why her? Why us? Why now? And trying to do the math, like see if it foots out, if it's like fair is essentially what you're trying to get to with why. And it's so hard. Like there's no way that we in our human minds could like make the equation net and say, oh yes, it was fair because look at how horrible a sinner you are, Ryan, or it's not fair because of this and whatever. It's just like the math is not ours to do. The only thing that I can say at the end of the day that is fair is that the Lamb who was slain receives the reward for his suffering. And not just once, but that actually that he receives that reward. Like he is this, infinitely faceted being. And every bit of him, every little facet of him deserves worship and reward. And so here I am 11 months after I lost my baby, and I'm working a job and I have a wife and I'm helping lead a church, and I have some experience of the world in this very moment that is intended to worship one small facet on him, and that is fair. Like that is right and good and just, and I can't figure out all of his other facets, and I can't figure out like what everything else around me is supposed to happen. All I know is that the fair thing, like what he deserves, is that me in this place, in this grief, and yes, in the midst of the grace of his word and of his presence, like he deserves my worship even now. And may the Lamb who was slain receive that reward. Like that reward is also his. Like he suffered to earn that and to receive that, and he deserves it, and that's the right and good thing.
Wow. Amen. I mean, that's what I felt when we were in your backyard, where I thought, wow, these guys are just destroying the enemy's works right now. They are praising the Lamb, and it just felt like a war, and we just won this battle, that you and B just won this battle. Your kids were winning this battle, and then going into her nursery and taking communion together, receiving communion together, and believing that she is more alive, in some ways than all of us, and participating with us. It was just, yes, this is his reward. The joy amidst the tears, the absolute belief in this, in the midst of so much pain. I just felt like it was the reward. And I hope that people that are listening have gained some wisdom, I think, in just how to talk to people that have lost someone very dear to them. Because I think what you just said, which is the first time I've heard you share that, we want to turn it into an equation. Let me say something to their pain that will equal comfort. Let me fix this and give them that little anecdote that can sometimes actually hurt more. And I was even thinking, Lord, did I do that? Did I do that with this gal even yesterday? I just text her, I said, go look at Ephesians 1, especially verses 3 to 10. I believe the Lord wants, as part of your healing, part of the healing he wants to do is by having you look higher, bigger, amidst this pain. Like, it's not just, down at our level.
Yeah.
But there's something, because I just kept thinking about B kind of screaming out, tell us the good news.
Yeah.
Tell us the good news.
Yeah.
And there's so much of God to be enjoyed that I think people have missed out on. And so,
and that's, to the point of, as you come along someone who's grieving, and let's be honest, I don't really know how to do it.
Yeah.
But my natural inclination with that kind of like math approach is to paint a picture of heaven. This is bigger. Heaven is bigger than this moment. So like, let's look forward to glory, or like, let's put our eyes on like these big, weighty things which outweigh our present trials. And that's not wrong, right? The math supports that.
Yeah.
But what I found oftentimes is that when I went to that too quickly, it felt like it was belittling the weight of what was present. And the reality is, taking us back to kind of where we started some of this conversation, is the Lord loves us and is willing to pour out that love into all of the spaces and into all of us, and he journeys with us in that love. And he has very much not said like, oh, you're grieving here, but I'm outside of your grief, come outside of your grief to find me, but actually like, oh no, he is in my grief with me. He's the one going into those dark places to work out my salvation with fear and trembling, or to save me to the uttermost. Like, he's going into them to make them new and to bring the light there. And ultimately, I have found, not only because it's his word, but also with his presence, like in conversation with him, like I have felt like he is the only one who has allowed me to like address some really hard things about grief. For example, he's the only one who can ask me certain kinds of questions. I remember I was driving somewhere, and I think I was crying and thinking about Zuri, and he was like, Ryan, I know Zuri has been taken from you, but would you also give her to me? And my first reaction was like, that feels unfair. But I kind of got where he was going with it. It's like, if she was taken, but I always harbored her as something that I deserved, that was, that he unjustly took from me, or something like that. Like, I could see my mind starting to like potentially go down a path of being twisted and all that kind of stuff. And so he very gently was like, would you give her to me? And I was like, I'm not sure. I felt backed into a corner, right? And I wasn't sure how I could respond. And so I just sat on it for a while, actually. I certainly didn't have, Abraham's kind of like, all right, tell me which mountain kind of answer at first. But we were then reading through the story about the woman with the alabaster jar. And as we were reading through it, there was just this question that came up, I think prompted by the Spirit. It was like, all right, there was a moment when the woman broke the jar. And at that moment, she could have either put it on Jesus or let it go to waste. Like, after the jar was broken, those are the two options. And he was like, all right, in some sense, like, her body has been broken. Will she be offered to him or not? I was like, well, Okay. And it's a kind of question that you don't just answer once. And there are all these times when I felt him sort of nudging again and just saying, like, not only does he want to receive her because he deserves it, but he also wants to receive her because in some ways carrying the fullness of her is not my burden to carry. And because he loves to share our burdens. And actually, as I have been able to offer her up to him, I've actually been able to like talk to him more about her in different ways than I would have otherwise. And there's just been a whole other sort of series or parts of our relationship that have kind of been nurtured or expanded as a result of this. But that was a very long-winded way of saying there are some questions that only he can ask. Right? You could not have come up to me after she died and said, "Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
Sarah's gone, but can you really give her to the Lord?" Like, there's no human that can come alongside that. And so ultimately what I needed was, and this goes back to, again, where we started, it's like, you just got to like be under the Lord and in his presence and going away for those like long stretches of just needing to be receiving from him and like listening to him. And I feel like so much of the orientation of my life as a believer has been about like what I do and what I produce and like even whom I love or how much I love them. But it feels increasingly clear to me as I am now reading through scripture over and over with fresher eyes and maybe like wounded eyes too, of like, oh, like my job is first and foremost, and the whole experience of this like life with him here and in eternity is to be receiving and hearing from him, like listening to him and being shepherded before I shepherd and being parented before I parent, being husbanded, if you will, before I husband, and all these different things that I think like reorient me or baseline me in the right way.
That's good. Well, I think when I made the comment about you teaching us how to grieve, the example that you and B were, and you quickly were like, well, I don't know that we're the example, you know. I think what I was alluding to was you weren't too quick to move off of the pain. You know, it's kind of that Ecclesiastes 7, no, it's good to be in the house of mourning. Yeah. You weren't just, and that's why you were saying, well, you can't just jump out to the big too quickly, to the neglect. Yeah. You kind of were doing both at the same time, the extreme pain and feeling it, not pretending it's not there, not just forcing it to go away, but feeling it. And like you said, and holding these glorious truths in tension and together. I just find it very interesting that we plan to share about this today. And the two things I wanted to talk about, one was the grieving and the insight from grieving, and then the other thing was just that whole idea of freeing people who maybe were trapped in that insecurity and maybe even in a system that is prodding their insecurity from a spiritual sense. Yeah. And it's destroying their souls, like both of those things. And I just think it's interesting that on Saturday, I'm dealing with a memorial service where there's a deep, deep grieving and this wrestle with, I'm on my face crying, worshiping, and now I'm dancing and how do I minister to her, to the next morning dealing with a guy who is just feeling beat up and the weight of the world on his shoulders and going, gosh, those are the people that I'm hoping God uses you and this talk to minister to them in some way. But as we kind of wrap it up, I guess, could you pray for those, I don't want to say categories of people, but you know what I mean? Like, there are people out there, I know you hear me, that you're not enjoying the love of God. You're weighted down with guilt. You believe in him, but you don't really, you've never tasted of this joy inexpressible. And I want them to taste that. And others that are grieving and don't know what to do with it, would you just pray for them right now?
Yeah. Lord God, you offer yourself to us. What kind of offering or invitation is that? That the King of the universe, the very one who created us, now offers to put himself in our hands and in our lives, and to go into our hearts. God, thank you for your humility, and thank you for your kindness, and Lord, thank you for your joy in doing this, in coming to us and making yourself available to us. And God, I pray that you would, by your Spirit, make me and make Francis and make all of us, Lord, just more certain that you love us and that it is your joy to come near and offer yourself to us. Yes, you love unto holiness, but you love also in joy and in compassion and in kindness and in gentleness. And I pray, Lord, that you would expand our minds and our hearts to be able to grasp more fully the beautiful and full dimensions of your love, Jesus. Your love is good news. It speaks to us under the weight of sin or under the weight of insecurity and confusion, when we don't even know how to navigate these systems. It speaks to us in our darkness and in pain. It doesn't speak from afar, Lord. You speak from near. You whisper. You offer us the place on your chest to hear your heartbeat. And I pray, Lord, that we would have a vision of what it means to grow in that love for eternity. That this love will not end. Your love will not be quenched. And that we have a hope that cannot be moved. A hope that brings that joy inexpressible. There is a particular kind of glory, a particular kind of feeling, maybe we can't even put words to it, of what it means to hold fully on to the promises of the goodness and the satisfaction and the elation of heaven, even amidst where we are right now. So Lord, stretch us. Stretch us, God, and come into the midst of that. Lord Jesus, thank you that you're the one who bridges the very depths with the highest heights. All these dark places you have been to, and all the highest heights you dwell in, and you bridge them all. And so we find ourselves in you, trusting in the work that you have completed at the cross and the empty tomb. Thank you, Lord. We praise your name together. Amen.